What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Andy's History Lessons. Hedgehog hair. Yep. Starting to get a little more porcupine-like. Okay. Today is a very special day because today, December 7th, 2019, marks the 78th anniversary of the Pearl Harbor bombing, which is what we are going to be talking about today. Now, I'm sure you're probably wondering, what made Japan attack America? I thought America wanted nothing to do with the war. And to a point, you're right. At the time, before the bombing, 75% of Americans, actually closer to 80% of Americans, wanted neutrality during World War II. They didn't want America to get involved in any more foreign affairs. They just said, you know what, let the Europeans work their own stuff out, which is basically what was going on. And plus, we were not economically capable of having a war effort. We were in the Great Depression still. But let's roll the clock back to the year 1938. It has now been a year since Japan declared war on China after the Marco Polo Bridge accident. Now, if you want to know more about that, I did a whole video on the Second Sino-Japanese War in this video right here. Go check that video out if you want to know more about that. So yes, it's now been a year since Japan declared war on China. They've been fighting and everything. And what do? We give the Chinese guns and money to fund their war effort against the Japanese. This was known as the Lend-Lease Act. And the Lend-Lease Act did help China greatly in fighting off the Japanese and resecuring Chinese land. Because Japan, 2 years ago, had occupied Manchuria and had set up the puppet state of Manchukuo. And if you play Hearts of Iron 4, you may recognize Manchukuo as one of the countries you can play as in the game. So then, let's roll the clock forward back to 1941. And what do? Well, because Japan has occupied British Malaysia and the Dutch East Indies, we cut off the oil access to Japan. We embargo oil to the Japanese Empire, which results in Japan losing 90% of their oil, which oil is needed to run the planes, to run the tanks, to run the battleships, and to run whatever motorized or mechanized land units the Japanese military had in their arsenal. So then what happened after that was Prime Minister Tojo Hideki planned the Pearl Harbor surprise attack. And then on November 26th, the Japanese set up a fleet of ships north of Hawaii, where they launched 360 planes. And then on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, Japan launches the devastating and shocking Pearl Harbor attack. And here's a fun fact I bet you didn't know about. 2 of the dive bombers that took place in the Pearl Harbor attacks had swastikas on them, which meant they were German dive bombers. And what that meant was Germany was secretly helping Japan with the Pearl Harbor bombing, which gave Franklin Delano Roosevelt a reason to go to war with Germany instead of just Japan. And then what happened was, after the attack was all over, Japan ended up losing just a small amount of planes and a few of their midget submarines. All the battleships that were stationed at Pearl Harbor were sunk. And then on December 8th, Japan officially declares war on America. Yes, December 7th was the surprise attack, but the actual declaration of war was not until the very next day, on December 8th, Monday, December 8th, 1941. And then on December 11th, Germany and Italy both declared war on America, which led to us being forced into the entirety of World War II. Now, even though this is a tragedy, it's also a blessing in disguise. You're probably thinking, how is Pearl Harbor a blessing in disguise? Because had we not been forced into World War II by the Japanese with their surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, we may have never gotten out of the Great Depression with all the Liberty bonds and war bonds that were purchased to help fund our war effort at home. It may have taken us probably until the 50s or 60s to get out of the Great Depression, which would not have been a pretty sight to behold. Speaking of tragedy, when a bomb was dropped on the USS Arizona, it went down a shaft down into the engine room, and then the bomb blew up and split the ship in half and caused 20-foot tidal waves in the waters that surrounded the ship, and all the fuel that spilled out created a giant oil puddle that's still there at Pearl Harbor today. And the men who were trapped inside the USS Utah, what happened was the ship capsized. It tipped over on its side, and then what happened was some of the men were able to abandon ship, but most of the men were trapped inside the USS Utah. And if you don't mind, before I end the video in a little bit, I'd like to take a moment of silence for those who fell during the Pearl Harbor bombing and throughout the entirety of World War II. Okay. Also, after the bombing, the number went from 75% of Americans wanting neutrality to 97% of Americans essentially wanting revenge against the Japanese Empire. Imagine that. Alright, guys. That is it. This concludes my Pearl Harbor special. Please remember to like this video, follow me on Facebook, leave a comment, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much. New material coming soon. Peace out and rock on.